If we had to pick two issues today where the church stands opposed to modern culture, one of them inevitably would be dealing with the value of the life of the unborn. However, the other most definitely would be the issue of human sexuality. And you may say, well, DJ, my church doesn't stand against any of those issues, and that sort of presents the problem. And it's the problem that we're going to address in this video. Has God changed His mind about human sexuality? If the church for 2,000 years had an established doctrine on sexuality, same-sex marriage, on the definition of marriage and same-sex attraction, and now we see culture pushing a different direction, and we see the church culture as well pushing that same direction, is that something that we misinterpreted from Scripture? Does the New Testament give us flexibility for the church to embrace the LGBTQ lifestyle? That's what we're going to look at in this video. So if you Google this topic, you will be inundated with search results that are clearly skewed, I'll be honest with you, clearly skewed in favor of the more modern opinion on this issue. Just yesterday, I Googled this, and the first 2 pages of Google, there was maybe 2 opinion pieces that gave an opinion of a more traditional view of human sexuality, and the vast majority of the pieces that Google presented a more progressive, or what we would call liberal view, a more modern view of human sexuality in light of biblical principles. And so honestly, when I'm asked this question, often people instinctively think we're going to turn to passages like are found in the Old Testament, like in the book of Leviticus. These clobber passages, as sometimes they're called. Leviticus 18, verse 22, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination." Or Leviticus 20, verse 13, which says, "If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination." So God wasn't lying when He said that. But when we turn to those passages, it presents a problem. And the problem is that those are passages found in the Old Testament law, and as Christians, we believe we don't live under the law. In fact, I would say as Baptists, we don't believe we live under the law today. And so it presents a problem, because not only do we see passages that say when a man lies with womankind, it's an abomination, but we also see verses like Leviticus 11, verse 12, that says, "Whatsoever hath no fins nor scales in the waters, that shall be an abomination unto you." That means eating a catfish or eating a shrimp was also an abomination in the Old Testament. Under the law. And so we have to ask ourselves, when we're addressing this issue, is it even legitimate to go to Old Testament law passages? Now, I'll encourage you. I think within the context, all of those passages fit the bigger picture. But I, as a pastor, when I'm asked this question, I do not turn to those Leviticus passages, because I actually think they present more problem than they present solution. Now, the problem with these Old Testament passages, these law passages, is that they are incredibly nuanced. They're too easy for a skeptic to just toss them aside because they seem to be in conflict. And honestly, I don't even think those are the best passages anyway, because they don't give any context regarding God's design for humanity and God's design for sexuality. You know, the claim is often made that Jesus never addressed human sexuality, that He was way too busy with more important things. And yes, there were a lot of things that Jesus was busy with, and there were a lot of things that Jesus never addressed. But can I tell you, human sexuality and marriage was not one of them. Jesus did address this. And sometimes people will say, Jesus set a new standard for humanity. He set aside the old standards of morality, and He focused on love, forgiveness, and equality. And they would say that Jesus was a revolutionary, and He came to throw off all the oppressive power structures. Well, the reality is Jesus came to introduce us to a higher form of spirituality, a higher understanding of truth, and that was through His life, the life of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So we're going to turn to 2 passages today. The first one is in the New Testament, and it's Jesus Himself speaking, and we're going to see what Jesus leaned on for His authority in the area of marriage and sexuality. Then we are going to go to that authority. Listen, if it was good enough for Jesus to claim was the authority, then that's the authority we should lean on as well. Our passage is found in Matthew chapter 19. And in Matthew chapter 19, beginning in verse number 3, it says, "And the Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him," or testing him, "and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?" So the question is about marriage, specifically about divorce. And I realize in this culture there was a major emphasis on the area of divorce and remarriage within the Jewish customs and the Jewish law, and looking for small areas that they could twist the law. I can't remember the word right now, but small areas where they could twist the law in order to find exceptions, in order to find those loopholes, that's the word, loopholes in order to be able to have an excuse to get divorced and remarried. So they asked him that question. And he answered and said unto them, "Have ye not read?" Now let's pause. I'm going to encourage you, anytime in Scripture, when you read the phrases, "Have you not read?" or "Thus it was said," or "It has been said," or "It was said in the beginning," always recognize that the author, which in this case is Jesus as the speaker, is appealing to those either as authoritative or as foundational for what he's teaching. I was just preaching yesterday from John chapter 15, and Jesus was talking about how the world was going to hate the disciples. And Jesus said, "As I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his master." And Jesus was quoting himself from 2 chapters previous in John 13, which is in the exact same story. It's in that upper room narrative where Jesus tells his disciples, "I'm going to wash your feet, and you serve others as you serve others as you would want to be served." Why? Because the servant is not greater than the master. Now, as I serve the master, you should serve as well as the servant. So Jesus quotes himself. So notice he says, "Have you not read?" And so we're going to have to ask, what is he quoting from? Because that's what he's appealing to as his authority. Did Jesus have an authoritative position on marriage and human sexuality? And the answer is yes. He appealed to the authority of a previous passage. "Have you not read that which made them at the beginning, made them male and female? And he said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, cleave unto his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh." Jesus was appealing to the creation narrative or the created order. Jesus is quoting from the book of Genesis, in those early chapters. So I would have you turn there. If that's the passage that was authoritative for Jesus, and we hold our position on human sexuality hangs on what Jesus taught. And that's what so many people say. And then they say, but Jesus never said anything about it, and so we can have whatever position we want on human sexuality and human gender. I would say to you, if we are appealing to what Jesus said authoritatively, then Jesus is appealing to the authority of the created order in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. This is not the law. This is not the Old Testament law. This was not what was given to Israel. This is bypassing. This is not even having to look at the law passages. What is the created order that God gave to us? Well, in Genesis chapter 2, this is the passage that Jesus was quoting in verse 24. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Now Jesus, while he's speaking specifically to answer a question of divorce, he actually is answering a question dealing with marriage. That's what the general topic is. And in doing so, he appeals back to the passage that gives us the design for marriage. So what is the design for marriage? Well, the design for marriage is given to us there in that verse and in a previous verse that we'll look at in a second. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother." Notice there's a man and a wife and a father and a mother. So God's design for marriage is given to us right there. And in that design, they leave father and their mother, they cleave to each other, and they become one flesh. Now, this is fleshed out later in Scripture, but God's design for marriage is one man and one woman for life. Do we see that always lived out perfectly in the Old Testament? No, we don't. In fact, we see many of the Old Testament patriarchs failing. We see many of the Old Testament characters failing. And yet when we get to the New Testament, Jesus is saying, in all of your failures, I appeal to you back to the authority of the design for marriage. And what is the design for marriage? It's one man and one woman. They leave their father and mother, they cleave to each other, and they become one flesh. And then notice Jesus' design, which he gave to us there in Matthew 19, he adds and he says, what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So he clarifies that design and says, and it's for life. One man, one woman for life. And that's dealing with the issue of marriage. But if that's God's design for marriage, then that means any aberration of that is not God's design for marriage. In fact, if we look back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, again, we're still appealing to the authority of the design of God. Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. That word for man is the word for mankind. God created mankind in his image, both male and female. You are all created in God's image. That's one reason why the issue of abortion is so important to those who hold the pro-life position. Because we believe that all human life is created in God's image. It's all in God's image. So if we are created in God's image, then that life is valuable. But notice what it says at the end of that verse. And in the image of God created he him. Here's the clarifier. Male and female created he them. So with the issue of human sexuality and human gender, has God changed his mind? The answer is no. Because in the New Testament, we see Jesus appealing to the design structure of the book of Genesis. Jesus was establishing that for our age, God created male and female, and God's design for marriage is one man and one woman for life. I hope this has helped you think more biblically about this issue.